Great. So it looks like it is time to get started. Thank you all for coming. My name is Will Pfeffer. I believe I know almost all of you. I am a senior program manager on the network team here at Code for America. I am the primary person responsible for Brigades on the East Coast. My colleague Veronica Young is the person in a parallel position for the West Coast. I am joined by my colleague Ceci Fischer-Benitez, who is the network specialist on our team. Also Kate Hanson, who's a member of, who's a Brigade member who's going to be presenting a project, and then Lou Moore, who is Code for America's Chief Technology Officer. We are going to go in that order. I'm actually going to spend a little bit more time talking than I usually do on these things, so I apologize for that in advance, but there's a little bit of additional information that I want to give folks, primarily because we did a similar workshop, although with different tools, about a year ago. Last July 2019, we did another workshop on measuring impact, and that one was focused on impact cascades. I'm not going to go over that whole thing. There's a fantastic recorded workshop on that people are welcome to go into. But I do want to talk a little bit about the challenge of measuring impact, and then give you a very brief overview of what an impact cascade looks like. So, as I think all of you probably know, it is a challenge in any mission-driven organization to measure impact. The kind of simple metrics that you might think of in the private sector don't always apply to our work. We can't really measure it in revenue or units sold or even really like daily active users. I suppose there are some things that getting people to use them is a big part of the impact we're trying to have, but that's almost never all of it. You can measure things, and a lot of times mission-driven orgs do measure things using what's referred to as vanity metrics. So that could be number of signatures on a petition, it could be number of Twitter followers, the size of your email list, how often people open it, even the donations that you receive. But those are just proxies for impact. They don't actually measure what you're trying to do. It's just an easy thing to pull a number out of, and you can put the number on an annual report and call it done. But if you really want to know what impact you're having, you need to figure out a way to measure that impact in a much more nuanced way. So it's not always super complicated, or at least it's not always impossible. I mean, I don't think it's impossible, but how complicated it is varies. So if you think about the EITC work, the earned income tax credit work that our Get Your Refund team has done, one relatively straightforward metric is an increase in how many people apply for and receive the earned income tax credit over previous years. That's definitely not all of the story. It's definitely not all of our impact, but it's a lot closer than, you know, how many people open the like earned income tax credit weekly email list. So another way that you can start to measure impact is with an impact cascade. And I'm just going to show you like a half dozen slides from that very quickly. Hopefully that's helpful. I did update the discourse post for this with links to these slides, to the video recording of the Impact Cascade workshop from last year, as well as to, we had, after that workshop, between that workshop and Brigade Congress in 2019, we had an Impact Cascade challenge that has some more information. So I'm just gonna share my screen quickly. There we go. So here's just an example impact cascade of what that can look like. And I will trust somebody will speak up if this isn't working, otherwise I'll assume that it is, the screen share, I mean. So this is an example impact cascade. It basically defines impacts over a variety of phases in each project. So the components of it, there are just the phases, which is where you start by defining those phases. Then with the phases, you would define a qualitative description of what your desired impact of that phase is. And then you figure out some metrics. So this is a good example of those metrics. And again, these slides are all available on Discourse. But an interesting thing I think about this, and I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit. Oh, here, so you also assign dates to these data collection phases, assuming that these are chronological phases, which I think they generally are. and it does change as you go along. But an interesting thing with this, so how to make an impact cascade, is you actually start at the end. I think that a lot of times going into a project, you have a more clear idea of the big picture long-term impact that you want to have, less so what the impact of your first 2 weeks working on it are. So you start at the end with the desired impact, then you sort of fill in the phases in the middle of how you're going to get there. You end with the earliest phase, and hopefully that process has given you an opportunity to figure out what those early metrics are. And then after you have your phases, you can sort of define the more quantitative metrics along the way. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to start by turning it over to Ceci Fischer-Benitez, who is going to introduce us to the concept of project canvases.
That's me. Okay, so let me try to share my screen here and make sure that it works. There we go. Can you all see that okay? Cool, okay. Present. Yeah. All right, so in order for me to talk about the project canvases that we're working on, I have to give you a little bit of background on our priority action areas, which is essentially what started this whole thing. So what are priority action areas? Priority action areas are 4 project areas where the network feels that we can have more outsized impact in 2020, and then it's where we'll focus our shared projects and resources via our distributed brigades across the country, and making it possible for projects to impact several places at once. So we'll be sharing resources like toolkits, workshops, and project management assistance that will be provided to brigades by the network team to support collective work in these 4 priority action areas. And those priority action areas are core notifications, voting rights, creating pathways to record clearance, and rapid response. Priority action areas were created in response to brigade members and leaders asking for more project support, ideas, and tools for projects that have impact, and cross-brigade collaboration on projects as well. They were chosen in a process where the network voiced their feedback on what areas were most excited to tackle on. What areas they were most excited to tackle on in 2020 via surveys, discourse, workshops, and conversations. The National Advisory Council then narrowed down these feedback into 3 most popular and viable topics. And then the 4th area, which is rapid response, was actually added after COVID hit our communities in our country and the world. For more information on all of these, you can go to our brigade.codeforamerica.org/priority action areas. So you can see a little bit more with more detail on what that all entails. So yeah, Anyway, so one of the ways that we share these successful projects through the project is through project canvases. So we met with our project leaders to discuss their projects at length and essentially like survey their experience as they executed these projects. So we asked some questions like, you know, what problem does your project aim to solve? Who is affected by the issue? Who did you partner, and how did you handle that partnership? There's going to be a list of questions that Kate will actually go with in more detail with you. So yeah, so with the help of Code for Boston, Code for Chapel Hill, Code for Dayton, Code for South Florida, and Code for Baltimore, we were able to provide project canvases so that successful projects in the rapid response priority action area can be redeployed or used as models in similar projects. So with that, I will let Kate Hanson, the project lead and brigade member at Code for Chapel Hill, take it from here and share how Code for Chapel Hill is working with us and using these project canvases to make their North Carolina COVID response work accessible to other brigades. Cool.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Ceci, and hello, good evening to everyone. Nice to see you, nice to meet you. I am Kate Hanson. Again, I'm a member of Code for Chapel Hill and an environmental scientist by day and a parent to young kids. So keeping it very real here during family o'clock. So nice to see you all. And I guess just so I get to know a little bit more, so clearly for our panelists, I know a little bit about you, but for some of the guests, maybe just put something in the chat. Just let me know if you are a brigade member, maybe like do a little dance. or give a wave. How many brigade, okay, brigade members. Any other brigade leaders out there? I think we have some. Okay, yeah, some brigade leaders as well. Oh, hey, Bonnie. Okay, and probably we have a few people here, at least, who have seen a project, have led a project or participated in a project and guided it through completion. I think give a wave. I'm sure we have a couple people in the group here who have completed that whole journey. So I'm really excited to have this chance to start a conversation with you. I'm going to tell you a bit about our project and about this work creating a canvas to represent our project. So I'm going to share in the chat here some information, a link to the Google document that is the canvas right now. We can talk about this later, but I know the location of these documents on the CFA site is going to be changing in the near future, but you can find it on the discourse page. But I've given you the link there, and also if you want to pull up our particular site right now, it's just nccovidsupport.org. So what I thought I'd do with our time now is just to make it a bit more conversational. I can show you the document, what that looks like. I might point out one or two highlights, some of the biggest lessons learned for me leading this project. And then I wanted to leave it open for time for you to ask questions about the project, or really just about the canvas aspect of the project. What insights would be meaty enough that it would make it seem worth your time to spend that 5 minutes or 10 minutes reading this document about another project? That I would love to know. So just to give you a bit of a background about us. So I co-lead this project with Chris Houston, who's our engineering lead, and I'm more of the project coordinator as well. Chris and I are both very new to Code for America, so we have found a lot of fantastic support reaching out to the national network to supplement the knowledge that we have within our own brigade, which is fantastic. And because we are newbies, we have tried our best to really start by doing two things. First, like asking a lot of questions, and second, really carving out time to listen as much as we can. So we are trying to do that to the best of our abilities within Code for America, and we're certainly trying to do that within our community that we work with here, is to listen and keep listening to their needs. So what is this project? We have a pretty simple, flexible mapping tool, a mapping interface. It's NC COVID Support is the name of the tool. And what it does is just gives a very clean interface for people looking for resources. So at first, what motivated us to start this project is that in North Carolina, in March, when we went into the stay-at-home phase, there was a lot of confusion around what was still open in terms of essential supplies, so food and pharmacies and pet supplies. And we observed the type of communications that were going out from our local towns and our local county level governments. And for instance, they were communications along the lines of a 30-page PDF of just copy and pasted links. You know, here are some restaurants that are still open. So we saw a lot of communications where we felt like, oh my goodness, our communities are struggling to find a platform that is easy enough to use and responsive and flexible enough for them to use that platform to share information with our neighbors and with our communities. So that's where we are. That's how we ended up at nccovidsupport.org. I can share my screen now and talk to you a little bit about the tool, but also then the Canvas document itself. So you can just give me a thumbs up if you can see this. So it can guide you through. So you'll see in the Canvas documents, it starts with a reminder of the priority action areas and of the role of the Canvas document. And then as you move down through the document, you get to the real core informational sections. outlined nicely in this bulleted list here, in this numbered list here. So this is what I see this is probably an open point of discussion as brigades start to use the canvases. There's probably going to be a bit of growth in terms of what type of insight do we want to share in the canvas versus the type of insights that we want to share in our project documentation that's already up on GitHub. So certainly we tend to share a lot of the nitty-gritty technical details in the documentation on GitHub, but GitHub doesn't really give us space to share some of the human behind the scenes portions of these projects, which are often critical components of the projects. So that's one role that I see of this project canvas. It's a way to kind of document our own history as we are creating projects. And I think that for us, even though we are a very new project, I know the project canvas, talks about you're ready to create a canvas if your project is deployed and has active users. However, right, there is a note that if your project's in an earlier stage, you can start working on a canvas. And that's something that for us, I think is really helpful. It's true, our project is at the point where we have a live site. However, I would say we're still fairly early on as a project, and just having to go through the motions of creating a personal history for our project in the scope of this document, I think is very powerful because it forces us to reflect on ways that maybe we wouldn't have had time to reflect otherwise, particularly in a fast-paced, rapid response project that's trying to adapt to a COVID need. So I can just show you a few sections of where I've tried to add that type of personal history, and then I want to pause and open it up to your questions and comments about what type of information you would find most valuable in a project canvas. So for instance, in our canvas, I talk about how we had a phase 1 and now we're moving into a phase 2 for this project. In phase 1, our goal was to help help our neighbors who were looking for information on how to shop safe. Let's say you don't want to go into the stores, or the stores aren't open. How do you get the things that you need? How do you feed yourself, your pets? How do you get medication? So we had a really nice tool that came up and filled that gap. However, then the need for that tool changed. Eventually, Google Maps caught up and started offering business information, and we've transitioned out of our stay-at-home phase. So we're now entering into a phase 2 of the project where we're using the same underlying architecture, but to build a site that's really a resource directory that's focused on local social support services. So in the project canvas, in some of the sections, like how does your project help solve this problem, I tried to give some background on specifics about what motivated us to create the phase 1 tool in the first place. And then also talked about some of the things that have guided us to phase 2. So for instance, we're moving away from supporting restaurants in Chapel Hill in our area because updating restaurant data is very time intensive. It's not as necessary now because platforms like Google Maps have caught up to some degree. We also, for instance, didn't have a lot of luck filing a Freedom of Information Act to our local county health department to get some baseline restaurant information. And we had a pretty tepid response from our local chambers of commerce in terms of investing in the restaurant side of things. Conversely, we have a lot of interest from local partners who are nonprofits that work in the community health sphere. And so they're the ones guiding us to this phase 2 product. And it's a product that we're really creating like in collaboration with them, which I'm very excited about. So I just mentioned that as to make the point that I like that the Canvas document gives us as brigades a place to talk about not just the parts of the project that worked very well or parts where we're succeeding, but also some of the stumbling points that we might have had along the way, and what might have driven redirections in the project as we worked along. So I'm going to stop sharing here for a second and just take a moment to field questions and let you guys guide what you want to talk about for the remaining portion of our time. And Greg, I don't know, you might, some other people here may have also created Canvas documents for projects that they are working on or referenced others.
I would start us off with a seed question, which is, have you had any folks reach out to you about this project, or do you know of any replications thus far for this work?
We do, yes. Thank you for asking that. We do. We have a site in the Bay Area that has branched off from our code base, but uses us as their base. And then we also have partners in St. Louis, so the Open St. Louis, who are not only using the code base in their hometown, but they're also then contributing to that central code repository. And they are really collaborators with us at this point, helping us drive features and drive the code and create documentation and labeling within the code that makes it very easy for someone to come in and rebrand and retool to fit their needs. Yeah, but I know we can do more there. We can keep working on our documentation on GitHub and also in this Canvas to make it really easy for someone to come in and hit the ground running. So we're still working on that.
Questions, Kate. Gregory here. So do you break up, like, for non-technical people, any of the items that you're working on in tasks?
So do we break them up in tasks? Is that as tasks, or is tasked a particular tool?
So, like, do you break it up into like little items or issues to work on? That's what I'm asking.
Good question. Yes, I was just chatting about this last night with somebody.
This is Zachary Antoine with the Office of Assemblymember Joaquin Arambula. We were given your number and name after you reached out to Jim Patterson's office for a...
Thank you. Yeah, so good question. The question was, how do we divide up tasks among especially non-engineering contributors? We used Trello a bit at first and Slack to manage those communications. I just heard from Jeremy in Open Raleigh that there is apparently a newer feature in GitHub that mirrors Trello, and they're starting to use that feature to help manage tasks that aren't necessarily engineering tasks. So that's something I'm interested in as well, because I like Trello for my own work, but to have a third channel, GitHub, Slack, and now Trello that we're expecting volunteers to tap into is a bit much. So I think we'll try GitHub, and we're certainly open to ideas of what you guys have found successful. I will say that one big engineering leg up is that our engineers have built us a custom content management system, which makes it a much easier experience to enter data, and it also allows us to create accounts for people contributing to the database and manage their access. And that part of the project has been key, because then now the database management and building the database is off our shoulders. It's something that that they can log in and manage themselves and manage their own volunteer workforce, and that's huge towards the project sustainability from our side.
Good question, Kate. While others might be thinking about what's coming up for them, in the context of tracking and thinking about impact, can you talk a little bit about how the project Canvas, it has or perhaps hasn't help inform that for you and your team as you're thinking about like how to shape the project and what kind of impact you're trying to have and how you're focusing on, you know, the right things?
Thank you. Yes, I was also thinking how timely that we're talking about impact, because we need to really spell that out for this phase 2 of our project. So we don't yet have a section on impact mapping in our Canvas document, but it's something that I am eager to add. Certainly, as we have not yet really reached out for funding support, but as we prepare to do that, we really need to have some of that higher level project planning in place. Right now, we're really working on pinning down what exactly, with kind of pinpoint accuracy, is the objective of this new tool, how it relates to other tools that are already in our local landscape, and then pinning down our messaging. And so I think, while not directly a part of that, the impact goals will help that framing as well. Maybe I'll throw a question out there too. So for anyone else who has learned a bunch by mirroring another existing project, do you have suggestions on some of the biggest insights that you took away that were not necessarily the technical nitty-gritty of how to code something? Well, I should say another thing is, so I'll interrupt myself. In addition to impact, another section that I have on there that I just left blank is user testing. We don't have a really concrete plan for user testing yet. And that's an area where I think that I would be interested, and I am interested in learning from other canvases, where I don't think the project has to have the same goals or the same technology as ours for us to learn from their user testing approach. So I'm excited to look for that kind of information in the Canvas documents.
I just wanted to comment generally to the benefit of having a series of questions to answer, like you're quizzing yourself on your project. You know, it really helps refine. Like I included in the chat a list of questions I answered for a separate like challenge, like a funding challenge, that I didn't have any of that stuff sort of formally prepared before entering it into the challenge, and the process of putting all of those questions together showed me I had way more accomplished than I thought I did by the end. So that was super affirming. But it's great practice for building a clear narrative and for refining your elevator pitches and everything like that. So I just really appreciate any sort of mechanism like this, because that works really well for me.
Yeah, thank you, Renee, for sharing that. That's a good point. I think you're right. And even sometimes kind of a checklist. Have you thought of this? Have you thought of that? It's helpful. The other thing that a section that I will include in our Canvas that I haven't yet included is a bit of a homework reading list to learn the history of this space that we're working in, this resource referral space. There are certainly others within Code for America who have operated in this space, and there's context locally. And so I think that's another thing that's important to have for our internal team to share, because we are lay people in that regard. We are not experts. And even though we're listening to our community partners, it's important for us to do our homework where we can and educate ourselves about the space that we're working in. So even a simple reading list with 5 or 10 links, I think is a good start. So yeah. Will or Ceci, were there other points about Canvases in general or questions that you wanted to pose to other brigades?
I do not have any. Ceci, I don't know if you have any other points you want to bring this back to the work that you've done with project canvases or PAAs. We can also move on to talking about OKRs with Lou at this point, though, if folks don't have other questions.
No, but I do want to note that we are continuing to create more project canvases for different priority action areas. And currently we're working on one around data-driven projects. So I've been getting some feedback about what projects might be great to highlight when it comes to data-driven decisions. But yeah, so I mean, I'm usually on Slack asking for suggestions. So if you ever think that you may have a good project in your hands, feel free to always reach out to me and see if we can get something going.
Great. Yeah, well, I think this is a good point to turn the corner over to Lou's presentation about OKRs. I will let him introduce them.
Great. Let me get my screen sharing. How's everybody able to see that? See my
Yes, we are.
GIF that I just downloaded. Cool. All right, so I'm Lou Moore. Pronouns are he, him. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Code for America. And we are going to talk about OKRs, but really we're going to talk about goals. We're going to talk about clarity, focus, alignment, and speed, and the impact cascade and the product canvas are both great segues into that, because these are all tools to help get teams aligned and moving in the same direction and delivering value as quickly as possible to your clients, which is the name of the game. So we will be talking about OKRs, but first, a little informational series on the importance of shipping services to real people, because enabling that is what good goals are all about. And especially in as complicated of a space as we all work, there's a ton of complexity in government. I bet all of you have been on a project at some point that felt something like this. Working with government is challenging. Building something from scratch is challenging. Taking that and turning that into something that really has an impact and creates real change is even harder. And I imagine doing that as a team of volunteers who only have limited time to contribute is even harder still. We have no time. We have no leverage when we're getting started on a new project. And let's face it, there's not really a simple model, an obvious model for doing government systems change from the outside in, like we all do. What we do have in our favor is speed of execution. We can work in a way that helps us learn faster and deliver more value than the status quo. And we really need to lean into that. You cannot do that as a team unless you're totally aligned on where you're going. And that's where setting clear goals comes in. I am going to give some examples of actual OKRs, I promise, but they are one way to do that and create this alignment that's so important. Alignment is also important because it enables autonomy. When you break your long-term strategy down into near-term achievable milestones that people can aim for autonomously and be creative about reaching, that creates a lot more space for people to get to where you want to go without having to necessarily define every detail of how to do that. So as a leader, what I'm always trying to do is build a great team around the work, set good goals, create clarity in terms of direction, and then trust your teams to figure out how to achieve them. For Code for America, that level of alignment and autonomy is really key because we want our teams to be always rapidly moving through this build, measure, learn loop. You might have seen this slide in some other Code for America materials. It's been around for a while. Always keeping our clients at the center. And so this is that speed of execution really on repeat. We at headquarters, we run a lot of projects and teams and can't have them blocked on people like me to make decisions. And for a volunteer project, you know, it's gonna be really important to be able to move the ball forward without too much coordination. So I think in both scenarios, we really want to make sure that we as a team are building the right thing. We've got a particular way of thinking about how to do that on our Code for America product and engineering team. And so before I get into the nuts and bolts of OKRs, I want to also show you how they fit into our overall approach, which is really goes back to that creating that alignment around where you're going so the team can focus on optimizing for learning and optimizing for shipping. First of all, understanding user needs. And this should be no surprise. It's in all of our organizational materials or operating principles. Try to hammer that home always. Understanding users and their needs is your best defense against solving for imagined problems, right? You want to be working, spending your limited time and bandwidth on solving real problems for real people. So user research is a tool in this. Actually just getting out in the field and following people through what they're doing manually and figuring out what the smallest piece you can automate as part of that. Making sure you have seams in the technology that you build that allow you to keep in touch with users. We use another thing called a North Star on each of our projects. You can think of this as the one metric that tells your team most clearly whether the public need that your service exists to fulfill is being fulfilled, right? And so this is something as you set more granular goals through OKRs, or maybe you're building out a set of all the metrics that you think tell you more about how healthy your product or service is. Maybe you're doing an impact cascade, having this idea of the North Star with outcomes that you definitely want to see, you ultimately want to see in the world, is helpful as a guidepost. You want this to be something that's ambitious, but that you can break down into metrics that you can influence and track, and that breakdown is usually a good input into creating good quarterly goals, which is where the OKRs come in. This is where the OKRs fit squarely. This is chart your course piece. So once you really establish it, have a key understanding of where the biggest user needs and user problems are. You've got a North Star sort of guide the work overall. You really want to chart your course and create that clarity in where you're going across the team, right? And so there's a bunch of different ways to do this. You want to pick the right cadence for you. But this is where OKRs come in for us. We have our big North Star, and every quarter we come in and set goals for the next 3 months, basically establish where we're going to focus for the next 3 months. And then, of course, on a more granular level, every week or two, we're doing an iteration planning session, and every day we're shipping software, right? So we think about those different cadences that create that alignment. And what doing this really allows you to do is then actually get to this point where you're moving really quickly through that build, measure, learn loop. You're able to optimize for the speed of learning, which really, once you've got technical service running, is really strongly correlated with the speed of shipping, because you're able to use shipping as a way to learn, to validate assumptions, to solve disagreements, to find the next way forward. You can figure out a way to get high quality evidence to answer your questions. So that's how OKRs sort of fit into the big picture of how we think about what we're trying to do, and just getting alignment across the team on where that is. So a little bit now about how we actually do OKRs. First, how to not do OKRs. So OKRs are not KPIs. KPIs are key performance indicators. You might also just call them health metrics. You might also just think about your impact cascade. You are going to have a larger set of metrics that you care about, right? So to go to the get your refund example that Will mentioned earlier, right? I mean, we care about all kinds of things that we've got dashboards for, from, there's 3 different ways that people can file. I want to know every single step of the funnel in that. I want to understand conversion rates. I want to understand which outreach methods are working. So there's a large set of metrics that I care about. That's not OKRs. OKRs are about what you're going to focus on for a time-bound period. OKRs are also not your backlog or your to-do list. So you're going to go from OKRs to something much more granular in terms of defining tasks. For us, it looks like OKRs, a rough roadmap for the quarter, and then 1-week iterations with user stories. But your OKRs, often teams end up kind of stuffing all their tasks into those. That's also not what they should be. This might be less of an issue on a volunteer project, but something important for if you're using this as a manager at an organization. These are not individual performance measures. You want these to be big, ambitious, shared. So they're not that either. And finally, they're not something you set and forget. You need to use them, track them, and pay attention to them if you want them to remain meaningful, which is one of the reasons why you want to set them on a shorter time scale usually. You know, I've seen orgs try to do annual OKRs and they are guaranteed to be useless after a certain amount of time. So how to OKR? First of all, cadence does matter. For the scope of the projects that we do, I usually find a quarter is about right for this type of planning, and then you do those other things on a more regular basis, like your weekly iteration, you know, your daily stand-up. But basically, you want to do just enough to stay aligned and sort of refresh and reset the shared vision for what you're going to do over some period of time. So quarter usually feels about right. It might be different for you know, different scale projects. Your objectives, the O of the OKRs, are qualitative statements, right? And so they should be pretty inspirational. They're really defining like what your mission for the next period is. And then the key results that go along with them tell you how you evaluate whether you've reached that qualitative objective, right? So they need to be measurable. They should be based on outcomes, not on tasks or activities. So it is worth it to take your care when picking your metrics. Think carefully about how you're measuring them. Make sure there's clarity also on how you're measuring them and what they mean to get the most out of them. Again, be ambitious. OKR should be stretch goals with strategic value, right? What are the two things that if we focus on are going to move the work forward the most over the next quarter? And then track, review, and reflect. Again, they have to be socialized to be effective. So we try to update them every week. And then we have every other week, we use something called a Foursquare for the product managers to give a quick update on deltas so that we're always doing like a light review. And then when we go to do our next quarter's OKRs, there's some retrospecting on the previous quarter. Okay, so I am going to run through an example. I went through that fairly quickly. I'll pause if there are any questions before I do that. Cool. So this is a real life example. I'm going to start with the North Star and how we think about metrics generally, and then go to an example of how we actually built OKRs for a quarter. Our North Star for Get CalFresh is closing the CalFresh participation gap, right? It's a great North Star. It's ambitious. It's big. There are a lot of different ways that you can try to move that. It is not a thing that we can measure in anywhere near real time. And so we actually have to break it down in order to make it meaningful in a day-to-day sense. But it really works well as a North Star, like as a guiding light for where we're going. But we can do this breakdown, and breaking it down like this also gives you sort of metrics that you can lean on when you decide to focus on different areas. So that participation gap data is 3 to 4 years old. All right, let's break that down into approved applications and approved renewals, right? If we can decrease churn and increase adoption, we can help close the participation gap. Great. Application approval rate data is also delayed a couple of months from counties. If we've managed to negotiate getting it, great. So we can't really measure that in real time either, but we can break approved applications down into submitted applications and approval rates. There's some delay on the approval rates, but we can project those submitted applications we can measure in our application in pretty much real time. So now we've got something that we can actually look at on a day-to-day basis. And you can do this tree in different ways, right? So you can do the same thing for renewals. You can further break it down into all kinds of dimensions that you care about, right? Like submitted applications is a function of visitors and conversion rates. You can break down all the different ways that visitors come to your site. You can break down all the nuances behind what leads people to conversions. You can build a data science team, and then you can have them do analysis on what are the biggest predictors for approval rates, and you can start tracking those metrics. So you can get pretty deep into it. But the point here is that you can build out a set of metrics you care about. The impact cascade is actually a great way to do something like this for your work. So it's similar. Okay, so now we have a bunch of interesting metrics. The ladder up to our North Star. Again, these are not OKRs. These are your KPIs or health metrics or impact cascade. You should track them, but you can't focus on all of those things all of the time. We can't as a small team be focused on growing the top of the funnel, improving conversion rates in the application, improving approval rates in collaboration with counties, right? All of that at once. We're going to do a lot of things poorly instead of doing a few things really well. So now you have to decide where to focus. And this does require some judgment and some conversation and some confidence that you're going to be able to go and iterate and experiment and learn and make adjustments if you decided to focus on the wrong thing. Here's an example from mid-year 2017. So we're at a point here where GetCalFresh, GetCalFresh is our SNAP service in California, by the way, if you're not familiar, and didn't introduce that, but we started working on it in 2015. And it now is serving the entire state of California, all 58 counties. SNAP's a county administered benefit. So it wasn't as simple as just getting an agreement with the state. We had to go county by county. And we're now responsible for about 75% of all the food stamp applications in California. But in mid 2017, we were in about 12 counties. We had a good product. Like, we built a good form. It was a simple, dignified experience. It worked well on mobile. It was fast. It was respectful of data plans. The drop-off rate, like the conversion rates, were good. Client feedback was positive. So that didn't feel like something that we really had to focus on. But growth was slow. We were struggling to get into new counties. We were struggling to reach more people in the counties we were in. Right, we got our link on the county website and we did that stuff, but it was harder to get more penetration than that. We also had just started getting some better data on approval rates from counties, and it wasn't looking that great. It's lower than other assisters, and all these things kind of play together too, because if your approval rates are lower, new counties are less likely to want to work with you. So we decided that out of all the things we could focus on, and this was really just through conversation. And this is also an important thing to note about this whole process, is that the planning is probably more valuable than the plan at the end of the day. But it was all through conversation. And we decided to focus on growth and approval rates for the next 3 months. So here finally is an actual OKR set. The objective: help more people by growing how many users we serve. It's qualitative. It felt inspirational to the team. They're really, like, the motivation for everyone here was really to help more people, like feed the people, was really like the theme for the team. So that's our qualitative goal, right? Like, help more people by introducing more people to getcalfresh.org. And then the key results underneath need to be measurable, specific, time-bound. The SMART goal framework, if you're familiar with that acronym, is helpful here. So we wanted to serve a total of 35,000 people across applications, and star 7s were the renewals. We wanted to, so that's kind of an overall growth metric. We wanted to increase our county. We knew that there were sort of two key components to growth. One was getting into more counties, and the other was increasing our reach in the counties that we worked in. So we set key results for each of those as well, targeting like specific counties that we thought would be strategically important, and then targeting a growth in application submissions in the counties we were already in, right, which would require us to try some new things in terms of outreach, right? So these are big strategic things to focus on. There's all kinds of other work the team was doing during this quarter, but this is something where like we needed to force ourselves to experiment with new outreach. We needed to push the envelope on what we could do with counties, and show that we could grow. Our second objective then was around increasing approval rates, right? So tied that back to the same theme, help more people, but this time by helping more people who are already Get CalFresh clients to actually receive the benefit. And we broke this down into just 2 key results. There's no hard rule on like how many goals to set, but in the spirit of focus, I keep harping on, like generally I would say like no more than 3 objectives, less is better. No more than maybe 4 or 5 key results, less is better. So 2 here, increasing the approval rate in 3 specific counties. We wanted to be specific about that because we knew there were partnership considerations. And then reducing denials due to missed interviews by 50%. So coming up with that required some deeper digging into the underlying cause of lower approval rate. And we knew that from hearing from clients, from analyzing the data, we knew that missed interviews was the biggest source of procedural denials, still is. So that was our other key result, was really focused on that. And that was it. That was for the quarter, a team of, I don't know, we were probably like 6, 8 people at that point. Doing client support, doing a bunch of operational stuff day in and day out. But those are our OKRs for the quarter. That was our mission for the quarter, was to move approval rates and to get more folks to Get CalFresh and get in more counties. So I will leave you with just a brief summary and this thought. Good OKRs should tell you what is most important to focus on right now to achieve your mission. That's their purpose. They should enable greater autonomy and they should enable speed of execution. If you feel like you're spending all your time planning, then you're not enabling speed of execution. The idea is to set direction so that you can just go do the work. They should give you a reference to evaluate how well you did in achieving your objectives. That's the quantifiable, the measurable part, so that you can use them to learn and make adjustments at the cadence that you reset your goals. And finally, the process of actually setting and reviewing OKRs together, like that, the discussions we had as a team around whether we should be focusing on approval rates or growth or any number of those other metrics were a huge part of the value, right? It gave us a chance to get all on the same page about what our strategy was, what our goals were, how we might get there, and to already like hit the ground running at the beginning of the quarter with a bunch of collaborative problem solving around some of the biggest things that we're going to be coming up. So planning is everything, plans are nothing. And that's it. I'm happy to share this deck if it's useful for folks. There's just a couple resources there. Under OKRs, the Art of the OKR Redux blog post is a really good brief, 3-minute read that hits on a lot of these points and I think is really good. The Google rework site is like a much more in-depth overview of how Google does OKRs. And then I think all this like ties back to speed, as I'll beat that dead horse some more. So I also just included a couple of things around iterative product development. The Lean Startup is a good more high level overview. It's still a book, but it's a good like high level overview of this build, measure, learn approach. The principles of product development flow, if you really want to like get into it, is the best thing I've ever read around like why things like Agile work. From like the importance of cadence and small batch sizes and like the effective queues of work and things like that. So it's not a light read, but if you're into that, if that sounds exciting to you, you should read it. All right, that's all I've got.
Well, thank you, Lou. That was super interesting. I mean, even as someone who updates OKRs every week, it's cool to like have a more in-depth view of sort of the theory behind them. So we do have some time for discussion, questions and answers. This is scheduled until for another half hour until 8:30 or 5:30 if you're on the West Coast. We don't have to take all that time, but we certainly do have some time for questions if folks have them.
Yeah, so it's Greg here. So my question is for Lou. So Greg, we're here with Code for South Florida. So quick backstory, we have a team of 9. We have 7 paid staff right now, and we've just implemented our own OKRs about, well, it's gone like a month now. So everybody on the team has their own objectives, and we're kind of measuring on the same cadence. Just question of like, how did you leverage kind of like that small team to like focus on like driving more partners or like app utilization, and how did you tie that back to fundraising efforts or revenue efforts to kind of like defend the work that your team was doing?
Yeah. So just understand the like less about how we constructed the OKRs, but actually about how we actually went about some of the growth stuff that I talked about, like that. Yeah. So I got a whole nother framework for thinking about experimenting with growth. But on the how do we reach more people where we're operating side, I think you need to start by cataloging kind of all the different potential ways that you think you could reach more people, right? That you think you could do more outreach. And there's a lot of common things. So like paid media is something to think about, social something to think about. Blog posts, in-person events, flyers, right? Working with CBOs. So like you can brainstorm a bunch of these things that seem like they might be valuable. You could do a quick scorecard kind of thing with your team around what you think are the things that are most valuable to try. And then I think the really critical thing is very quickly testing those things, understanding whether there's promise there, and then really doubling down on anything that looks like it has traction. So in our case, like we tried a few things. The thing that very quickly got, like, I took like $1,000 or something and started a paid AdWords account. We had been using a nonprofit grant account for this, and it has those have a bunch of limitations, right? So had the hypothesis that maybe if we were able to like bid higher, that paid media would work out, because it didn't make sense to me. I was seeing all these searches around food stamps and CalFresh, and not a lot of traction there. So that was the experiment. It was like, let's take $1,000 and a week of running ads with no less of the financial limitations, and see what happens. We did that in one county in like 10x applications. I would say like got lucky on how quickly we found traction there, because it is a thing that people are like online searching for, and a platform like AdWords makes it really easy to, if you do find traction, to scale it up. So that was lucky. Like it would have been harder if the thing that worked was flyers or radio spots. But that's basically what you want to do. And then at the point that you see that kind of traction, you sort of like put everything else aside, and you're like, all right, how can I double down on this? And so for us, that looked like, then in the following quarter, extending the AdWords work to other counties, then moving from AdWords to test out other platforms like Facebook and Instagram, and then working on cost optimization, because in the first experiments, I wasn't trying to do anything efficient. It was just like, let's see if something can work, right? You're really trying to find that early traction. So that's what worked out there. I would take a similar approach on other things, and you just need to be aware that it's not always like the same channel is not always going to be the best thing for growth in every project. And then, yeah, on the county side, I mean, that was complicated, right? We had to have that was, we have our program team that, all the other folks from Code for America are a part of, on the, the Get CalFresh Code for America team, on the Get CalFresh program team. That was a big part of the public partnership strategy, was relationships with counties, and like identifying which counties would wield the most influence over other counties. California has this weird SAWS system, so there's 3 different consortia of counties that actually have their own entities who do the IT procurement. So we actually had to map out this space of like counties, state stakeholders, the county consortia leadership, and try to understand who the most important stakeholders would be, who had more influence, and then think about what would be most influential for them. And it did also, like, it played with the other stuff I was talking about, because we also knew that all of this stuff was tied together. We also knew that more volume, if we could go to some of these counties and say like, hey, look at how many people we're actually reaching and the better outcomes we're getting, a bunch of counties would say yes if we had that. So we needed that. And a bunch of counties were like, we're not going to work with you if your approval rates are low. And so we needed to improve that, right? So the county strategy also tied to what we had to accomplish with the product and with growth. But that was sort of a separate thing we had to do. And then what you saw there show up in the OKRs was like, you know, add X more counties, including 8 of the 10 high target ones. But there was a bunch of work behind that. Like, what are those high target counties? Yeah.
Do you have thoughts? Well, Greg, if you have any follow-up questions, I'll leave space for that. But, okay. Lou, do you have any thoughts on specific changes or specific considerations that you might have to make to scale down an OKR approach to like a small team, a part-time team, a volunteer team, that like which parts of it you think would be sort of most different from a full-time perspective?
Yeah, so acknowledging that I haven't done this as a volunteer, a couple of things I would maybe think about. First of all, I think actually doing something like the project canvas at the start of the project is a really important clarifying thing, and that serves a lot of the same purpose when you're getting kicked off. So that's great. I think I might think about maybe being more, being like less prescriptive about the cadence, and maybe just saying like, this is what we're going to focus on, like, until the next time we regroup. I don't know if it would make sense to be on such a strict like quarter by quarter cadence that makes sense for a company. So that's one thing I would think about. I would probably just, if anything, just be even more disciplined about not having too much in them. So I could see a version of this where, actually this person who wrote the Art of the OKR blog post I put there had another article where she makes the case for like, you should only have one OKR. So I could see a world where you're like, actually it's one OKR set, one objective with some key results off of it. And that you're saying like, you know, maybe it's just for the next month, or maybe it's until some milestone that you know about in the future. And it's less of a rote process than we have, because for us it's valuable to like do it at the same time across all of our teams, right? Because we're coordinating with a 85-person organization, right? So you just don't have to solve for some of those things.
Hi, this is Nishal. I work for a local government here in Southern California, working on data stuff. Mark, Lou, question for you. How do you map or confront the sort of reality within local governments where the procurement process isn't sort of agile? It's more, you know, give us this big plan driven, and map that back to a more fluid and agile process?
Yeah, I can speak to it to some degree, although like I've got less experience with it at the local level, so I'd invite Meredith to jump into, or anybody else if you've got thoughts. I mean, our ability to start a lot of our projects with philanthropy is a kind of a game changer for that in a lot of ways, right? And that's how we can start to get a foot in the door and then get experience working with governments. And then if you know, there's an opportunity for sustained service, a lot of times after you've built trust and shown value, there's a lot better chance of you coming up with some kind of creative contract mechanism, right? So to use the Get Cal Fresh example again, right? We actually just didn't do procurement for a long time. We actually never did. I mean, but we do have a contract with the state now. So what we did is like, we just built the thing. We funded it with philanthropy. We were super scrappy. And then once we got to a point where we had built up enough leverage in the ecosystem that shown enough value that people, stakeholders like the California Department of Social Services and some of the key counties and the consortia wanted us to remain a part of the ecosystem, then we had leverage in terms of trying to get a contract in place. And I've seen a bunch of cases where like people can get creative when the value is like obvious. In this case, we were able to negotiate a contract with the California Department of Social Services that covered our almost the entire cost of the project on a time and materials basis, in a very similar way that they would do with food banks or other assisters. And so there are other examples of that. If I'm going to generalize, it's usually like we get started with philanthropy, which gives us a foot in the door. And then try to work towards, when it's needed for sustainability, try to work towards some kind of payment model that's not a traditional RFP, that doesn't get us into some of the same kind of incentives of just like deliver against the spec versus deliver outcomes for people. It's hard. It's hard.
I have kind of a silly one, but I'm still getting used to like all the channels. The slide deck that we were watching earlier, was that shared anywhere?
Will has it.
Yeah, I'll post links to the slides. I'll update the discourse post with all those links, and then I'll post in Slack once that's updated so you have a link to it.
Thank you.
Sure.
So my question is, if nobody else has any questions, so to that point, like if you're a brigade and you're at a point where you have paid staff, one of the things that I have is like the staff is on a cadence and we're trying to meet these quarterly goals, but we also have like this volunteers of people that want to do things. And not oftentimes, you can't get new volunteers on like a project if you're doing development on it. It's not the best time. So I'm really interested in hearing like from anybody really to see, when is the time you think volunteers like kind of step up, and how do you balance that act of like trying to meet these goals with paid team versus trying to get volunteers in there to create these kind of like feel good stories, as well as get people that really want to like help out, but just may not have dedicated time?
Do you want to start with that one, Meredith?
I think that's one for me. Yeah, it's a great question, Gregory, and it's, I think, the like $1 million question, right, that Code for America has been thinking about for a while, and since we've had the Brigade Network, which is how do we incorporate our immense volunteer power into some of the like more slightly more traditional, I guess, program and product work that happens within HQ. So we experimented with that this year very intentionally by creating what we call our integration pilots. So how do we integrate the work that brigades are doing with some of our more core programmatic work, our Get Your Refund team, our Clear My Record team. We were thinking about, okay, what are the opportunities for more connection here and to invite volunteers into the process. And we had tried some things in the past and had mixed successes, but creating these integration pilots created the infrastructure in which internally we could staff the project accordingly with that lens of what are the best opportunities for volunteers to participate here. And we picked one specific project, one specific team to do that on. And this year we picked that, as you know, I'm speaking to this as though you weren't directly involved in this, Gregory, for other people's benefit, but of course you have quite a bit of insight here. So we staffed someone on the network team, on the earned income tax credit team, right from the very beginning, to be asking questions like what pieces of the technical work might be kind of friendly to volunteer participation, or where, when we're developing partnership in one state, can we take some of those lessons and leverage the relationships brigades have across the country to scale our partnerships to other places. And then COVID-19 hit, and the demand for the Get Your Refund services went through the roof when folks needed virtual tax prep services, immediately, and that the urgency and the need for the service that this team was providing. And we can send you more information about everything this team did and kind of what the earned income tax credit is and all of this as part of follow-up materials. But for the purpose of this point, I would offer that like intentionally structuring it so that you are looking for opportunities for volunteers to participate is a key point from a staffing perspective. Like, have someone on your team who's dedicated to doing that, who's also dedicated to working with the other staff members to like get aligned on what the opportunities are for volunteer participation, because that takes work. That is work organizationally and sort of culturally to be able to get aligned on where volunteers can participate and what's going to happen when they do, so that you're setting expectations really clearly on both sides. And perhaps most importantly, I think you need an objective that cannot be achieved without massive people power and volunteer participation. So you need to be able to try to achieve a goal that is so big that there is no way you're ever going to be able to get there unless you kind of open the floodgates of participation and invite more people into the work. And I think we had that kind of golden opportunity with COVID-19 and with our Get Your Refund work, because the intention was to help these VITA sites, volunteer income tax assistance sites across the country, prepare digital tax preparation services. But we're going to pilot with like 5 different partners and see how it went, and then iterate from there. And then COVID hit, and again, this demand went through the roof, and there was no way we were going to be able to serve the number of partners who needed the service, the number of people who needed their taxes prepared and needed that done virtually, without kind of blowing up a little bit the way we were structuring the team and serving clients. So we created teams that were helping with partner onboarding, partner support, translation, training materials for volunteers. We sort of created all this different infrastructure with some of the same philosophies that Lou just outlined, which is like, try a few different things and see what's working, and then double down on what is. And we found that our partner onboarding team, which Gregory and others were a part of, was one of those, because we had volunteers who were able to like help create a process, follow the process, train others on that to help onboard a bunch more partners. Same with like training materials and translation services. And then I think celebrating the wins is really important to keep volunteers engaged, as well as to like help staff recognize the importance of that volunteer participation, and to celebrate the work that they've done too to help facilitate that is, I think, really critical. So doing that through like we've experimented with some newsletters where we're celebrating those stories. We did interviews with some of the volunteers talking about their experience. Sent thank you cards to all of our volunteers participating in that work, with like some metrics on the impact that they've had as part of this project team. So those are some of the key ingredients that come to mind through the EITC one as an example. I'll invite Lou to add anything else to that.
No, that was great. The one thing that came to mind as you were talking was, I don't know if this applies that much to the size of your team, Greg, but I think really key for us to actually fully embed the network work in the EITC work, which was that was one of the things we were piloting here. And that ties into sort of some of the principles around setting good goals. It's much harder if you've got some goals that are like sort of owned by some other team. I wouldn't do that. If you've got a really, really important thing that you need to focus on and you don't have the right people on the team, it's probably a good sign that you need to bring them into the team in order to make that happen. So I think like, and that allowed us to set these really big, audacious shared goals, like Meredith was talking about. Like we didn't like bring someone from the network team on board and then have a separate goal for them. We brought them on board so that we could have an even more ambitious goal about how many people we would serve and how much capacity for tax prep assistance we could build. And they were goals that like would not be achievable without this. But by bringing all the people or at least the folks on staff who are coordinating the volunteers onto the team, fully embedded, really allowed us to do that and allowed the team to still feel like it was, they controlled their own destiny. So that's important.
I think one small thing that I would tack on to that is that there's a lot of overlap between like an integration pilot working well and more sort of general community organizing principles, is like giving people an opportunity to take responsibility for things, giving people an opportunity to step into a leadership role and feel like they are a full member of the team and have real ownership over stuff is a really good way to build like volunteer team cohesion, even if it is a team that's managed by paid staff.
That's a really good point. There's an organizer adage that I try and hold myself accountable to, which I think is also relevant for just building strictly volunteer operations, which is a willingness to give away the keys. So if you're the person who has the keys, like literally give away passwords if you need to be like, here's my account so you can access Airtable, so you can get the information for the partners that you need to reach out and help them get onboarded. To sometimes that's Facebook pages, sometimes that's the Google Analytics accounts, and embedded in that is a willingness to like trust volunteers to rise to the occasion, and also like identify when it's not working. So having a small team of 4 or 5 people who's tasked with one particular element of the project, always recommend appointing like someone who's in charge of like helping to shepherd that work forward. And sometimes the team doesn't quite gel, or sometimes it's not necessarily the right person to lead it. And so you need to say like, okay, we tried that. Let's, I think you'd be great on another team, or can we try with someone else stepping up in a leadership role for a while? So willingness to like experiment there with like different dynamics in the team is also important. But yeah, trusting that folks will rise to the occasion, and a matter of, making some adjustments and giving them the tools and access they need to get there.
As a chief security officer as well, I would recommend against giving people your passwords, but you should give them accounts, give them admin access, trust them, and have them set up 2-factor authentication.
I could sense the cringe when Mayor.
Oh, great. Completely agree with the point.
But yeah, I have to say to your point, Meredith, I don't know if this is somewhere in the middle, having that independent email account, or for us it was just a Gmail account and Drive and everything that's not mine, where all of our emails come from that, and our domain registration is linked to that. Something more neutral where maybe that makes it safer to hand over the password. Something that is less linked to the individuals and can be a shared resource as far as taking over the driver's seat is helpful. Because we're too broke to pay for monthly G Suite membership to do it the right way.
I think that's something we can help cover for you, just as a side. But
okay.
Yeah, I think that's something that we offer, but yeah.
We'll talk after. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Well, it is 24 past the hour, so we do have a few more minutes, but I want to thank all of you for participating, and especially Ceci, Kate, and Lou for presenting. That was super helpful. I will also invite all of the attendees, if there are topics that you are interested in hearing about that would be helpful in your brigade, please reach out to me and suggest them. This topic, OKR specifically, was suggested by a brigade member or by a brigade leader, and I think that this is supposed to be helpful for brigades. So I can guess at that, but it works best if we all work together to figure out what those topics are.
Can I ask
one session on password management and account access?
Right.
I'm gonna get us in trouble. Don't give away the password. Use that theme to inspire giving volunteers ownership.
One quick question for Code for America team. So we used to have a brigade here in Long Beach. This is before I moved here, and that has been dormant for a while. Apparently somebody's in the community still, is a brigade captain or has some sort of like administration over that. Who can I reach out to get some of, maybe basically get this brigade here rebooted or restarted?
Me. So we can chat. I'll send you I'll put actually my email in here too, so that we can have a conversation on that.
Perfect. Okay,
Great.
I'm sending you an email right now, and we'll schedule some time.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
So I guess along the same lines, Cecilia, I'm kind of doing the same thing with the Detroit Brigade right now. And I had some questions. I have the meetup and people like starting to form a team or whatever, but there was like some next steps with the MOU, etc. And who could I email you about that or?
Yeah, and Will, right? Will, you can also help with.
Yeah,
process.
yeah. So that would be me and Ceci, and we will get all that set up with the MOU and stuff.
Okay. So you want me to send you an email or a sticky note or?
Yeah, that would be great, or a Slack message, whatever works for you, and I will follow up. I'll follow up with you tomorrow about getting that finished up.
All right, thank you.
That's awesome, Brian. We've been trying to get a brigade going in Detroit for like years now, so that's great news.
I'll do my best. No pressure, no.
No pressure. We're here to help. That's awesome.
Great. Well, thank you all.
Brian, do you mind posting your email here as well in case I need to reach out and kind of maybe we can piggyback on each other's work?
Yeah, sure. I'll post it in the chat here is fine. No problem. Oh, I don't. There you go.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks, folks. Hope to see you at the next one, and feel free to reach out to any of us with further questions.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Well, thanks everyone. Bye.
Bye.